Hello there guys, what is going on? Son of Chelsea back here again for the first time in a while. I thought the season's ended. I wanted to make a video to reflect on it. Not specifically the Watford game, although it was nice to be inside the ground. It was nice to see us win at Stamford Bridge to end the season, even though it required a 91st minute Ross Barkley header of all people. And of course the uncertain future, the ownership, some of that is going to usher in a new era at Chelsea, and it's very hard to gauge what's going to happen in terms of who we're going to sign, who we're going to sell, what the shape of the squad is going to look like at the start of next season, which is always the case at the end of any season, but particularly this year there's so many moving parts and things that have to come together for Chelsea to have a productive summer that you I don't want to sort of sell it as everything's going to move in a great direction, because we don't know that. And hopefully the sanctions being lifted once the takeover is complete will start to move things along in a positive direction, and we can start to look forward to the next chapter at Stamford Bridge. How do I reflect on this season? How do you reflect on this season? It's not one of the worst, but I feel that as much as I try to and give you a rational perspective on this channel and look at things in, say, a nuanced way, which we try and do, football is illogical, football emotions are illogical, and despite statistically us having the highest points tally in the Premier League since our last title win, 76, despite the fact that we played about 60 games in the season, we went to both domestic cup finals and lost on penalties, which, you look at both of those situations and you say the performances on the day were very good and very close, very close, both two finals against a very top team that Chelsea, could have won on another day. We had tough injuries, we had COVID issues, we had maybe bad fortune, we had the whole ownership situation, which is going to loom over this season forever. The way we look back at this season, I think the biggest takeaway from it is the ownership and the change in ownership historically. I know that some people will view this season as a sliding doors unlucky season, where if Ben Chilwell, who it was wonderful to see him come on for the final few minutes against Watford and see him there in person, and just what an incredible player, and hopefully he can get back to levels and really go into pre-season feeling good and confident, and it's a great sign of his recovery that he's making. It was a nice gift from Tuchel, I think, on the final day. But if he didn't get injured, if other players didn't get injured, Chelsea would have done something amazing this season. We could never know that. Those are hypotheticals. But I wouldn't want the club internally to think and be fooled into thinking that we're like one or two players, or we're just a bit of good luck away from winning the Premier League title. If that was kind of the mindset. Tuchel was stressed in the past week. He started to use the word rebuild. Now, I don't think a rebuild is a negative thing, because I think Chelsea have needed to rebuild for several years now. I think that it's something that we've needed in a Premier League context. 19 points behind the champions Manchester City, the same gap we had this time last year. I think that's a very telling stat, and one that the club should be looking very hard at, and not just I think it's good that, as much as it pains us, there's nothing to turn attention away from the Premier League and the bad end to the season and where Chelsea actually sit in the league. I think in previous seasons, there's been obviously the Champions League, which took all of the focus, rightly so, over the summer, because it was such an incredible night. We had other moments during the recent years, the Europa League, the FA Cup. There was something to kind of mask what had happened in the Premier League. And I think for too long, Chelsea haven't been focusing on the Premier League. Chelsea need a rebuild, because the squad they've got currently just isn't competing for the league, even if we do have great runs in the league. So that's kind of my opening thing, is that my hope is this season is the end of an era at Chelsea, not just in terms of Roman Abramovich selling the club, leaving the club, and we get new ownership in, but also stylistically, recruitment, the way the club goes about their business in a transfer window, the way in which the club needs to be rebuilt and revamped in certain areas, and those shortcomings we've seen for far too long in the league. can be improved upon, or at least we can start to put the blocks in place that can build a squad in the long term that hopefully can get Chelsea back to a position we'd like to be, very competitive in the Premier League title race. So that is kind of my opening thing. I don't want to be overly negative on this, because there have been worse, not only worse in terms of stats, there have been worse feeling seasons. I mean, the Conte season where we won a FA Cup with him, the 17-18 is still my most unenjoyable season watching Chelsea. Yes, even more miserable than the 15-16 season. But I think there needs to be context within all the bad luck you can throw in. I think that just feeling sorry for ourselves, I don't think is going to accomplish much, and will sadly, as too many years have. I want to get to the Champions League, because I think Chelsea took the wrong lessons from the Champions League when fundamentally this season. But I don't want it to be kind of a woe is us, the world is against us, and only if this didn't happen, everything would have gone perfectly. Refereeing decisions are against us. I think that's just a sad and I think a bit reductive and kind of just a bit mindless to think about. Things have gone against Chelsea, but things will always go against Chelsea in a season. That's the nature of football. I still think Chelsea are not doing enough to maximise, and haven't been in a Premier League context, to maximise the talent at our disposal, the power of the wealth we've had for several years, that I think in terms of a transfer, we've become so slack on that side. And you just hope that, as I say, things can move in a more positive direction. And I think so many players potentially leaving, I actually think is a good thing, because I think it will force the club's hand in some situations with players we don't want to leave, but some who I think need to leave will hopefully rebuild the image of the squad in the end. So I think when analysing the season, and listen, I don't want to be here for hours because there's so many things that happen in the season, and I think to do a season review, it's very hard to get everything in there unless you're doing a documentary. The way I look at this from a film perspective is, if we break down the season in 3 acts and I review it as kind of, say, a film that started, because, the great films that you love, usually what kind of defines them is the 3rd act, the way you feel leaving a cinema, how they wrap up the narrative, how you feel euphoric at times or devastated depending on how that film's gone, and the story's been completed. I know obviously we're not dealing with fiction here, we're dealing with elite sport, but the end really matters to a season, and it does to a film as well, as does the beginning. And Chelsea's season this year, like a film, its first act was pretty good, really good at times. If we say that the first act was August to the end of November, when Ben Chilwell got injured, that was a really good period, and ended up, maybe you can look at stats and say that we had better sort of unbeaten runs in the season, but I think that was the run where we felt that we could be in a title race this year. Lukaku had arrived, he started scoring, and even though there were still some issues in terms of Chelsea's creativity and attacking, the defence continued where it left off at the back end of last season. And you just felt by the time we hit those 2 performances against Leicester and Juventus, still the 2 outstanding performances of the season. I think 3rd place is probably Real Madrid away. The whole mood of the club was very, very different. I think there was a sense of confidence about the team. In a lot of areas, it looked like we were going to go in a good direction. But then the second act of the season, if we go from early December, after Chilwell gets that injury, to late January, early February, maybe mid-February, it changes. It massively changes, and we start to see the flaws in Chelsea's Premier League campaign, and things that we have seen before. As I say, you can throw in all the variables of the intense schedule, but these were things that Chelsea, even with the COVID problem and of course that Wolves game that probably should have never gone ahead based on the Premier League's rules at the time, mostly Chelsea knew they were in for an intense season, and we started to see the limitations of this squad, the awkwardness when first choice options went down. Tuchel couldn't quite impact the games in the way he had last year. That sort of really transformative and sort of inspirational side of Tuchel, I think, really has dwindled this season. And you look at that run there that obviously took the title away from Chelsea. Any hope by the time we lost to Man City on January the 14th, I think it was, 13 points, and that was it. But then you have kind of, after a disappointing second act, you have, I want to say, between the second and third act, as we're building up to the third act, you have kind of this absolute seismic event in terms of Roman deciding to sell the sanctions, which obviously impacts everything surrounding the club in this period of fear and uncertainty. But then the players respond quite well, and we go on a really decent run up to the March international break, where we're set up in the case where it looks like we're going to stroll to third with a decent points tally. We're in the quarterfinal of the Champions League against the team we beat last year, and of course the FA Cup was still there. In the end, what looked like a really exciting third act. Chelsea fell at the third final hurdle, basically. Got knocked out of the Champions League in disappointing fashion in the end. Quite heartbreaking considering what we did in that second leg. And then obviously losing the FA Cup final for a third consecutive season in a very similar way to the Carabao Cup final. And obviously that hurt. And I think the Premier League in particular, really disappointing the level of performances and some of the poor results Chelsea have got. You know, we come back to sort of conflicting emotions over a season. If I would have told you back in August that we would have got the highest points tally in the Premier League since our last title win, achievement, even if we don't win the league, but you balance that with the worst home record in the Premier League we've had since the 15-16 season. Those things have to be balanced out, I think, when we look at the season as a whole. And I feel that is something that really needs to be focused on. I think the Premier League has to be the focus. And as I said earlier in the video, I feel that we all got fooled after that Champions League win into thinking the squad was in a much better place than it actually was, and that it was closer to the top two in the Premier League than it actually was, because a 38-game season is very, very different to an amazing cup run. And unfortunately, internally, the club, you know, the people, the decision makers, I think, looked at it and maybe felt that, well, you know, we've done the mid-season sacking thing again and it's worked, so let's just keep doing what we've been doing for the last 5 or 6 years in terms of the way we build the squad, the way we look at certain aging players or players that have underperformed for a long time, but, you know, they'll still remain key senior players. And we just went into the season with a very similar squad that had, with players that had kind of failed the club in previous years. And in the end, what you get is, I think, what you pay for and what you've seen. You know, Chelsea in the end in the Premier League, there's a lot of shades in these remaining weeks of recent years in terms of that top four chase. In the end, how close we ended up to Arsenal and Spurs was pretty depressing in a sense, because you wanted to have at least that gap to the teams below third place, and Chelsea of course get third place, but it's not quite in the emphatic way where you feel like we're really going on an upward sort of trajectory as you hoped it would. I feel that there are many different variables to that. You know, you look at the players, you look at the finishing of players, particularly in the final third, where the attack just hasn't really impressed that much this year and hasn't clicked in any sort of way where you kind of feel like you want to sort of stick with it, because I think there's an argument to sort of rip it up and start again, basically. And I feel like Tuchel was saying as much pre-game before Watford, where he was like, we will kind of look to get new forwards hopefully in the summer, and I think that kind of speaks to that. Tuchel himself, I think his system being found out quite extensively of Chelsea's passive, but also, you know, as much as people talk about our poor finishing, two things can be true at the same time. Chelsea are still woeful in front of goal at times, but we also are a team that doesn't create a lot of good opportunities and can be very repetitive and quite boring and dull in our build-up and slow. How much of that is a player having to take responsibility, and how much is that the system kind of interfering with the decision-making? I mean, that's something that's very hard to kind of analyse. Maybe we put too much on coaches, but I do think when I look at a stat that tells me that despite Chelsea having a high XG over the season, I think in the Premier League, or at least I think it is the whole Premier League, only Leicester have outperformed their XG more than Chelsea. So what that tells you is, despite Chelsea and all of us fans having this perception that we're really poor in front of goal, and if we only took our chances, things would be better, those stats, if you believe in XG, if you're someone that kind of buys into that sort of way of looking at football and data, kind of tells you that Chelsea don't create a lot, still don't create a lot to help us in games, and it comes back to sort of the system, the formation. Do we always need 3 centre-backs? Tuchel very adamant in his post-match interview after Watford that we're sticking with the formation listen, we've seen a 3-back system work for Chelsea and win us a Premier League title, but you just kind of wonder with the way the Premier League's moved on since that Conte season, even though it isn't that long ago, Chelsea, I feel like, need to be more daring and bold. You look at the top 2 and they go for games, they take risks, and both of them were losing on the final day, but both of them came back to win. And there is a gung-ho approach that unfortunately this Chelsea team, either because of limitations within key positions, that doesn't allow Tuchel the safety and sort of the confidence that he can say to a team to go for a game, or just the system itself not really allowing that and not really facilitating that sort of environment of risk taking. There needs to be radical improvement on that for me, because I've seen far too many games where you can blame injuries all you want, but I've watched Chelsea play some poor teams this season and not beat them and control a lot of the ball, but not create a lot and not look that inspiring and have the ideas in the final third that really make the difference. And I feel that maybe 1 or 2 signings, particularly a maverick player, a wide player, someone who is going to try things at times that will exceed those kind of patterns of play and will hopefully do something unpredictable. I mean, I see a certain winger from Barcelona who could be available, who, as much as I was sceptical in January when the links came up, a player that Tuchel likes very much, you look at what this team lacks, and it does lack someone who is going to take bodies out of the game, do something a bit unpredictable, and we'll have to see on that front. Midfield, obviously, another key position. Chelsea just don't have the legs and the mobility in central midfield that we've lacked. Listen, I was saying the same thing last summer in terms of a defensive midfielder. I think that in other areas, you've just seen the lack of legs at times. How on the right side of defence, when Trevor Chalobah's not been given chances and maybe not been at his best himself in a very impressive breakthrough season, Azpilicueta, I think, has started to show his age, and I think he's coming to the end of his time now. And again, limitations within the squad that you scratch under the surface of the Chelsea team. A lot of people at the start of this season spoke about a world-class squad. Chelsea have a lot of bodies, we have a lot of names, so that's the advantage we have over a lot of clubs. But in terms of world-class or depth or a profile of player that supplements another, where Tuchel can rotate the team and there isn't this massive sort of gap or awkwardness, that is still something that Chelsea are really struggling with, and I want to see rectified, because until we do that, I think you're going to see these real lapses in the season where the team suddenly looks really uncohesive. And unless, as we saw in that run at the start of the season, not only were Chelsea exceeding their XG, but you had Ben Chilwell and Reece James in such fine form. And listen, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that them only starting 4 games together this season in the Premier League does not have an impact, because you look at the numbers, particularly of Reece this season, who's become a creative monster. He really has, despite not playing tons in the league. Both of them stay fit for a season, and you add suitable options elsewhere. I think that Chelsea are going to be in serious business, because I look at, say, Lukaku. How many times, I want to go back and look, how many times did Chilwell, James and Lukaku start? Mason Mount, all of those players start on the same pitch, and I don't think they did at the end of the season. I particularly in the time that James and Chilwell were flying and starting together, I think Lukaku was injured. So again, if Lukaku sticks around in a pre-season, you want to see sort of that development, and I think that there are players who need to step up. Again, I feel that I'm going to hopefully doing a lot of videos, more focusing in on the squad, the players, their performances over the season, maybe a player ratings video of some kind, because I don't want to go through every single player, because listen, I feel that it's kind of a shame when I look at that attack and there aren't many players that jump out to me as ones that I really want to sort of single out for praise, other than Mason Mount, who won his 2nd Player of the Year in a row. Wasn't my choice. I would have gone for Thiago Silva, but as people pointed out, the defence in recent weeks hasn't been that good, and Mason's numbers this year I think have been arguably better than, I think in certain ways better than last year, and he just continues to be such an influential player for Chelsea. And you feel like if Reece stays fit for a full season, I think he's going to be right in there in terms of Player of the Season, because his performances when he has been on the pitch, I think, have been generally very good and creative for Chelsea, and so important. So nice to see Mount getting that award. And we move on next season. Listen, it's so unpredictable. The ownership changes everything for Chelsea, and it impacts so many areas of the club. Where are we going to be sat now? What is the ambition of new ownership? Even if we've heard things of with Todd Boehly wanting to be really competitive. Does that translate? Does his way of working at the LA Dodgers in a very different sport and a country translate to Chelsea and the Premier League and European football? Does it work the same? Of course, so many uncertainties, and I want to speak about the ownership when it gets fully confirmed. We've seen Boehly around Stamford Bridge. He's finally seen Chelsea win at Stamford Bridge, which is great, and seeing him on the pitch there. So I think Hans-Burg Weiss was on the pitch as well with him. So it's exciting. So hopefully it's going to be an exciting summer and we can go into next season with a bit of optimism. Nice to end the season positively. Also, there was a lot of humour at the fact that Liverpool did not win the Premier League and didn't get that quadruple. So there was a little bit of extra, celebration, I guess, inadvertently on the final day of the season. So those are my thoughts on the season. Listen, I don't think it was the worst. I think we made steps forward, particularly statistically in the league, a better points tally, but still I think there is vast improvement to be made, and hopefully this season acts as a catalyst for a very new Chelsea that hopefully can start to do the things we've wanted them to for many years. So thank you guys for watching, and I will see you again very soon. All the best.